This is topic 3.4 and 3.5 from the course and exam description for AP Environmental Science, Carrying Capacity, Population Growth, and Resource Availability. All right, pay attention to your learning goals, your learning targets, which are up here. This will help you follow along in your study guides. All right, so we're going to learn about density-dependent and density-independent factors. This is something that you learned in biology class, so this is a review. In order to see how populations change, scientists consider those two things, density-dependent, density-independent. Okay, so density-dependent factors are dependent on the size of the population. So for example, if there's a high population, there's more predation that comes in, there's more diseases that come in, there's less water, less shelter, less habitat, there's competition for mates, less food. All of those are density dependent. They can limit population size because there's a lot of the population. Density independent is not, it is independent, so it's not dependent on the size or the density of the population. So these are things that just happen. Think natural disasters like fires, floods, tsunamis, drought, big one, human-caused pollution, climate change. Those are things that will make species numbers decline and has nothing to do with the size or the population density. So with population growth, without any limiting factors, you have an exponential growth model. So if this is population size in the y-axis and the x-axis is our time, if you've got unlimited resources and no limiting factors, your population is going to increase rapidly. So we're not talking human populations yet, but we'll get to that later in this unit. But if this is the size of the population of American crows in your town, if they start to come into a town, they haven't been in a town before, but a breeding pair moves in, and they're going to make babies, and those babies are going to make babies, and there's nothing to keep the population size down, so there's no limiting factors. They're not running out of food, they're not having predators, they're not being influenced by limiting factors. You're going to have exponential growth, and we call this a J-curve. Now, things that can limit population size, again, we talked about them earlier, we're revisiting them again. Density-independent factors just come in, they're like natural disasters or humans do stuff. Storms, fires, heat waves, drought. Okay, density-dependent, too much, more diseases. You need a lot of territory, like mountain lions need lots of square miles to hunt, so there might not just be enough room to hunt, might not be enough food, not be enough clean air and water for whatever species needs it. Okay, we're still on exponential growth. So exponential growth doesn't have those limiting factors. We talked about high biotic potential in the last video. And so when populations are not limited by limiting factors, they can have maximum biotic potential. They can fulfill their biotic potential with maximum number of babies, offspring being born. And we call that R, and so we have an R selected species. If there's no limiting factors, they're going to have that massive exponential growth. Now, K selected species can also have exponential growth, but not quite as often as R, but they can both, if there's no limiting factors, R and K can both have unlimited growth. But K tends to be more around their carrying capacity because K stands for carrying capacity. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so there's another word, fecundity. That's the ability to produce offspring. So R selected species tend to have a J curve and kind of go above carrying capacity. This will all kind of make sense as we go through more slides. All right, so there's our exponential model again. I had to put it back so you can kind of see no limiting factors, nothing stopping the growth. All right. right, going on. Okay, now, most of the time, there are factors stopping growth. So, let's talk about those things. Logistic growth model is what we have in a graph. I'm going to show you real quick and then we're going to go back to the slide. So this is a logistic growth model. It makes an S-curve. So first we start with exponential growth. We start with J, and then we have limiting factors, density dependent, density independent, that limit at the carrying capacity. And so where the graph starts to even out and become horizontal is our carrying capacity. So now let's go back and take a look at some more information. Okay, so we call this the logistic growth model. Growth initially is exponential, then it slows as it approaches a carrying capacity. It creates an S-shaped curve, and when you hit the horizontal part where your carrying capacity is, the growth rate slows. Now you're still having babies born and things die, babies born, individuals die, births, deaths, but they're even. Okay? Now, it's not common to just stop at your carrying capacity. Most often, there's some overshoot and dieback, but you kind of go above and below the carrying capacity. Let's talk about that. So this is the perfect carrying capacity model. It makes an S-curve, kind of a weird sideways S-curve, like that. Now, in the book, it talks about some experiments with parameciums. So there's a guy named Georgie Gauss, and he experimented with this. You do not need to know the experiments for the AP test, but it's really interesting on how they figured out things like limiting resources. And here's the pictures of the carrying capacity of two different species of paramecium. There's little single-celled things that live in the water. You can't see them without a microscope. And so again, it's just really an interesting case study. Let's go on. So the paramecium stuff won't be on your APA test, but it's an interesting thing to learn and to understand carrying capacity a little bit better. Okay, so populations are affected by carrying capacity, including humans, but we haven't really met our carrying capacity yet. Maybe, probably not. Depends on who you talk to, what scientists who study these things think. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so many populations will continue to grow and run out of resources, leading to a dieback or complete decline as the example below. Okay, so sometimes, look here, this reindeer population grew exponentially, and then all of a sudden, like there was like so many babies, they all ate too much grass, and then they all died. There wasn't enough for the whole season. And they all died. And so you have this massive die-off. So that can happen too when your growth just goes so fast, and then everybody doesn't have food, and then you die off. So that's one example of what can happen, and that's overshoot, like massive overshoot and die off. But most of the time, it kind of goes like this. You don't completely go all the way to zero. So most of the time, population exponential here, you overshoot a little, some die off, you come back here. Overshoot a little, die off, oh, there's more resources, more babies, oh, too many babies, die off. So most of the time, you can draw a line of best fit. So the line of best fit here that you learned in math is our carrying capacity. So overshoot, die off. And this oscillating pattern, that's a word they'll often use to describe the oscillating pattern, and so that's up and down. So a lot of these oscillating patterns follow predator-prey, and we talked about predator-prey in topic 1.1. And we have here this lynx. Around our area we have their cousins called the bobcats, but in Canada they're called the lynx, and they look very similar. And the hare's a bunny, and they had this experiment where they tracked over time, starting in the 1800s to the early 1900s, the population of hares and lynxes. So first, the hares will go up, and when there's a lot of them, the lynx have a lot of food, so they're going to make a lot of babies. So species, including humans, when they are well fed and well nourished, they have a higher chance of having babies. When there's been some studies, like when women have famine, like for example, there's some places in World War II where they didn't have enough food. They were under siege, like St. Petersburg in Russia. And basically women, when they're starved enough, they can't get pregnant. The body stops ovulating. So that's for humans. Same thing for animals. When you don't have enough food, the body does not release eggs, you don't ovulate. So not only are they not going to ovulate when they're when they're hungry, but even if they do get pregnant, they don't have enough food to nourish infants or fetuses or embryos, or if the babies are born. So anyway, there's dieback. So there's this give and take oscillating pattern. When prey goes up, predators go up. Then there's a dieback because the predators eat so many that the prey dies back, but then the predators can't find enough food, so they die off, or they don't get pregnant and have more babies. So you have this oscillating pattern. Okay, we have here another example, the moose and the wolves of Isle Royale, which is in Lake Superior in the Great Lakes. And they mapped this for them as well. So you can pause the video and look at this if you wish. Okay, so besides food, habitat can be a limiting factor. Some species rely on habitat created by others. So for example, woodpeckers create habitat. So when the woodpecker population declines, so are the things that eat or that live, like some bugs and insects that live in those spaces. Their populations can decline as well. All right, so populations can decline below carrying capacity if our species that help other species die off, if humans can alter a landscape, and your other resources are limited and finite, they can kind of push against the carrying capacity of other species. When resources needed by a population for growth are abundant, then our growth accelerates. When resources shrink, there's a population of unequal distribution of resources. So maybe you have enough food, but not enough water. If things change, like during drought times, well, usually in drought you have less food and water, but maybe you have enough food, but not enough habitat space or places to make nests for creating offspring. To live in a little nest area underground, or some other place like a mouse or a rat having a nest, not just birds. So maybe you have enough food, but not enough place to make offspring for them to be protected. So there's a lot of different things that go into whether a population increases or decreases, and sometimes you can go below carrying capacity based on like nesting availability, but not your food, like I just talked about. All right, and then over time, this is just a little thing about species, whether their numbers are increasing, stable, decreasing, from mammals to birds to amphibians to reptiles, fish, and insects. All right, so that was pretty fast, but hopefully you got what you needed for topics 3.4 and 3.5.